Right, हो गया. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ولله ما في السماوات وما في الأرض ولقد وصينا الذين أوتوا الكتاب من قبلكم وإياكم أن اتقوا الله وإن تكفروا فإن لله ما في السماوات وما في الأرض وكان الله غنيا حميدا ولله ما في السماوات وما في الأرض وكفى بالله وكيلا. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. Last week we did ayah number 128, 129 and 130 of Surah Nisa, and we stopped at وَكَانَ اللَّهُ وَاسِعًا حَكِيمًا. A brief summary of what we did last week. We discussed the situation where a woman who has co-wives fears that her husband will divorce her, and what are the things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives an allowance there. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows negotiation, as-sulh, and He mentions that the sulh is preferred to a divorce. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminded the husbands of the asl, of the original ruling, which is ihsan and taqwa. And then He reminded us that complete adl is not possible, and in fact is not what is required. What is required is adl in the things that a person has the capacity to do so. And then He reminded us again about islah and taqwa. And finally He reminded us that if the two are separated, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give the rizq to both parties. وَكَانَ اللَّهُ وَاسِعًا حَكِيمًا. Here we start from ayah number 131 of Surah Nisa, and we'll move forward insha'Allah. The beginning of these ayat are an amazing sequence that have not been repeated anywhere else in the Quran. And this amazing sequence is unique in the form that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala repeats وَلِلَّهِ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ 3 times. And for those who, memorize some of the Quran or notice the mutashabihat in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned in the page before وَلِلَّهِ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ وَكَانَ اللَّهُ بِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ مُحِيطًا. This came directly after the ayah about Ibrahim alayhi salam, and we mentioned that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned these ayat so that He could remind us that verily it is He who owns everything, right? And that He is not possessed by Ibrahim alayhi salam, right? And that him being a friend to Ibrahim alayhi salam does not bring him at the same level as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So there the intent of وَلِلَّهِ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ has a different connotation. Here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala first of all says وَلِلَّهِ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ. This is a standalone statement. After this comes وَلَقَدْ وَصَّيْنَا. Okay? So understand that these two are separate standalone statements. And what is the purpose of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saying وَلِلَّهِ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ? What is the context? The context is وَإِن يَتَفَرَّقَا. If they get separated, Allah will give the rizq to both parties. And as if to remind you that all of the rizq is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what does He say? وَلِلَّهِ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ. So seeking the rizq from Allah requires the aqeedah that first of all He owns everything. Secondly, Him owning everything has qudra behind it as well. And third is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that can give the rizq and no one else has ownership of anything. Do you understand this very easy concept? Yes, okay. Secondly, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is reminding the husbands to have taqwa. He said in 2 places, وَإِن تُحْسِنُوا وَتَتَّقُوا. And in the second place He said, وَإِن تُصْلِحُوا وَتَتَّقُوا. So He required the taqwa from the husbands in both places. Was the taqwa required from the wives or the husbands? Who remembers from last week? You don't remember? The husbands, right? وَإِن تُصْلِحُوا requires negotiations from both of them, right? So the taqwa then is required from both parties in the second ayah, and in the first ayah where he said وَإِن تُحْسِنُوا وَتَتَّقُوا, the ihsan is coming from the husbands. So the taqwa was reminded towards the husbands. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, for you to have taqwa, if you go back to Ayatul Kursi, how does Ayatul Kursi start with? What are the concepts that he reminds us of? First of all, he reminds us of his wahdaniyah, right? Allahu la ilaha illa huwal al-hayy and al-qayyum. What is al-hayy? Ever living, the source of life, right? And al-qayyum. What does al-qayyum mean, guys? Come on, this should come out like this. You want it like that. You're learning tafsir, students of knowledge, with notebooks in front of you. The qayyum should come out like that. You all read Ayatul Kursi after every single fard prayer. Is that true? Then you should have the knowledge of what al-qayyum means. I shouldn't have to be waiting 5 minutes for it. Come on, guys, I'm waiting.
The name of
Yeah, but what does it mean? Sorry? But qayyum, what does the actual word qayyum mean? Yep. Translate qa'im to English. What does that mean?
established. Everything is established because of Allah.
Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala establishes, upholds, maintains. Qama, yaqumu. Qama means to do what? To stand. Right? When something stands, something else can take support from it. Okay? Something else can support, and the thing that stands can support everything else as well. Okay? So Allah is the maintainer and the supporter of everything. Right? So, when I'm just doing a very quick revision of Ayatul Kursi because this relates to when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says وَلِلَّهِ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ, because that's a central theme of Ayatul Kursi. What's after that? Al-Hayy al-Qayyum. What's after that? Allahu la ilaha illa hu al-Hayy al-Qayyum. لا تأخذه سنة ولا نوم له. Okay. The central theme of Ayatul Kursi now is له ما في السماوات وما في الأرض. When He Himself has everything in His power, and He is the source of life, and He is Qa'im al-Qayyum, then everything else should fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ اللَّهُ الصَّمَدُ. Right? And what does a samad mean?
Everlasting, eternal.
We did samad very recently. We did samad, yes? One person at a time. I'm looking towards him, meaning he's talking. Yes? Everything goes towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Everything depends on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So here, when Allah is saying, وَلِلَّهِ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ, He is saying to the husbands, Allah gave you a responsibility. Okay? For you to be able to carry out that responsibility requires that there is an authority above you. Okay? All systems require that there be something on top of that person. So you have an employee. That employee has a manager to make sure that the employee is doing their work. Right? The manager has a divisional manager. He is managing all the managers. That divisional manager has a CEO that he reports to. What is the CEO doing? He's making sure that the divisional manager is doing their job. And the CEO reports to who? The shareholders, right? At the end of the day, the buck is stopping with the shareholders. They get to decide whether the CEO stays in their job or not. So now what is the system in the family unit? You have the children, you have the wife. They all report to whom? The husband, right? The father of the children, the husband of the wife. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to the husbands, because we gave you that authority, don't forget that there is someone that you report to. And who is that someone? Directly to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when the husband starts to think that he has been given so much authority, he then has the problem of abusing that authority. So to remind him to be in his place and not get out of your place, Allah says, وَلِلَّهِ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ, to show His kibriya, His majesty, His authority, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is great, and therefore everything else apart from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is worthless in and of itself. So then when the husbands read this, then they will say, okay, I need to fulfill my responsibility rather than abuse my position. This is the purpose of the first وَلِلَّهِ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ. Maulana Alusi in Ruh al-Ma'ani says that you can really take any kind of interpretation that you like into this first وَلِلَّهِ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ. For example, if we take the ayah even before this, وَيَسْتَفْتُونَكَ فِي النِّسَاءِ, the answer to that is وَلِلَّهِ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ. When they ask you about the orphan woman, when they ask you about the woman, when they ask you about this and that and the other, remind them that what? Allah has ownership of everything. وَلِلَّهِ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ مَا فِي الْأَرْضِ. I was in New Zealand and taking a Sunday class of children. And every week I would make this point, وَلِلَّهِ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ. And then one of the boys, he got sick and tired. He said, every week you're teaching us the same thing. I said, if you just learn this one thing, this will save your entire life. Just learn this one thing. If you learn that, وَلِلَّهِ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ, this is a solution for all your problems. Wherever you are walking, wherever you are talking, wherever you're doing any activity, if you are aware that Allah owns every single thing, then you will not deviate from the truth. You will not do any sins at all. And this is what leads to taqwa. So then Allah goes into how taqwa is important. He says, وَلَقَدْ وَصَّيْنَا الَّذِينَ أُوتُوا الْكِتَابَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ. We have given wasiyah. Definition of wasiyah. We've done wasiyah already, so you should know this. وَتَوَصَّوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَصَّوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. What does wasiyah mean? Advice. The advice that is given as a last parting advice. The same wasiyah is given when a person is dying and he wishes to give some of his wealth to the poor or some of his wealth to a relative who is not going to get the waratha. What does he do? He gives a wasiyah. So when the wasiyah in our technical language is something that has a lot of strength to it. Well, my father gave me the wasiyah when he was dying that I should do this. So it has a lot of strength to it. So Allah uses that exact same word to say that it is a parting advice that we gave to you as something that you should really uphold. Then as if to show that this wasiyah is nothing new, he said we gave it to those who were given the kitab before you. وَلَقَدْ وَصَّيْنَا الَّذِينَ أُوتُوا الْكِتَابَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ. All the mufassirun say that this min qablikum is either related to utu or related to wassayna. So we can say وَلَقَدْ وَصَّيْنَا مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ. We gave the wasiyah before you. To whom? Utul kitab. Or you can say we gave the wasiyah to those who were given the kitab before you. Either way, the grammar will fit. Which kitab were revealed? Suhufi Ibrahim wa Musa. We have Az-Zabur, we have At-Tawrah, and we have Injil, and then we have the other books that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given that He has not mentioned to us and that have not been retained. The point of this is that the wasiyah of taqwa is not only for us, but in fact was given to all the people before us. So as if it is a universal law that is required by all peoples. And to understand this deeper, every single human institution or system is utterly and completely dependent on taqwa. If you do not have taqwa, no human system can function. Why is this? Because if, let's say, you set up any rule of government or institution and the people do not have taqwa, the judge does not have taqwa, the policeman doesn't have taqwa, the normal people don't have taqwa, then there will be complete chaos and anarchy. You can look at, my country, the Indian subcontinent, and look at how the entire system is full of corruption. Why is there corruption? By and large, the root cause is that people do not fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? So that the normal person says that the people above me are doing corruption. If I don't do corruption, I will fall behind. And the middleman says that the people below me and the people above me are doing corruption. If I don't do corruption, I will fall behind. And the people above them say, the politicians are getting away with billions. Let me have some slice of the pie. And the politicians are at each other's necks to get their billions. So at each different level, everyone is doing corruption because they have no fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they don't see that there is a akhirah. So every single system requires taqwa. Then in the matter of the household, if there is no taqwa, then there'll be all manner of abuse. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that this requirement for you to fear God, to follow the rules, is universal. Is nothing that just applies to you, applies to all the people before you as well. Something that applies to everyone, therefore, is a rule that can never be broken. It's not something exceptional. Let me give you an example of rules that apply to us that did not apply to the people before us. For example, Hajj. Did Prophet Nuh alayhi salam do Hajj? No. When is the institution of Hajj? When did that start? Ibrahim alayhi salam. Good. So therefore, there was never a ruling for Hajj, and there comes a ruling for Hajj afterwards. You understand this concept? Taqwa is something that has been there from before Adam alayhi salam. Wasn't it a requirement for taqwa for shaitan to prostrate to Adam? Didn't he need taqwa to prostrate to Adam? Yes? So it's something universal, something that is there from the beginning of time, that is a requirement. وَلَقَدْ وَصَّيْنَا الَّذِينَ أُوتُوا الْكِتَابَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ وَإِيَّاكُمْ أَنِ اتَّقُوا اللَّهَ. Have taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Just as a very quick revision, definition of taqwa? Muhammad. Give me the 6 points in taqwa. Come on. Someone give me 6 points of taqwa.
When you worship Allah as you see Him?
No.
You strictly follow the instruction of Allah.
Okay.
Obey.
Sorry. Okay, write these down, or write them in your notebooks or your pens. I want this memorized. Okay? This is a jami' definition of taqwa. And ta'bud Allah, that you follow the orders of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with the nur of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, desiring the pleasure of Allah. Those are 3 points. To follow the orders of Allah with the nur of Allah. Okay? Desiring the pleasure of Allah. I'm going to test you next week. Okay? And then the opposite 3 are to stay away from what Allah has forbidden with the nur of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, from the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Do you remember that I have said this before? Yes? Have I done this before with you guys? At least 2 times in this masjid. Okay, this is the 3rd time. Next week will be memorized, inshallah. That is a jami'a definition of taqwa. وَإِن تَكْفُرُوا فَإِنَّ لِلَّهِ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ. This is the 2nd time that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala repeats مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ. Kufr aslan is to hide something. The farmer, when he puts the seed in the ground, he hides the seed, and that is called kafara. That's the root meaning of kufr. It is to deny something. So when you deny the existence of Allah, or you deny that He owns everything, or you deny His wahdaniyah, you have done kufr. Then Allah says that if you do kufr, then I own everything in the heavens and in the earth. And therefore, Allah is showing that your doing of kufr does not reduce the milkiyya, the ownership of Allah by any degree whatsoever. You remain insignificant. Allah is not at all harmed by your kufr. But in fact, it is His rahmah that He has shown you the guidance and He desires from you the obedience. وَكَانَ اللَّهُ غَنِيًّا حَمِيدًا. And Allah says that He is ghani, which means that He does not need anything at all, and He is hamid. And hamid means that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is worthy of hamd, and I'll ask you the definition of hamd in a second. He is worthy of hamd, and all hamd is given to Him, even if nothing in creation does hamd at all. And even if there is no creation, before any creation is made or created, He is worthy of hamd. Do you understand this concept? So when you say Alhamdu lillahi Rabbil Alameen, you are actually saying that all hamd is given to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? Now what's the definition of hamd? Praise and glory. Jazakallahu khair. وَكَانَ اللَّهُ غَنِيًّا حَمِيدًا. So what he is saying, Allah is ghani of your kufr, and He will have hamd given to Him even if you individually did kufr. And then he adds on to there and says, وَلِلَّهِ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ وَكَفَى بِاللَّهِ وَكِيلًا. A third time, and the final time. He reminds you again that everything belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and He is enough as a wakil. So now, the first one we said, وَلِلَّهِ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ, was for the point of view of rizq. The second was from the point of view of taqwa. This last one is as a wakil. This is for the person who has dhulm done onto him. The orphan or the wife who is not being given her rights. A mu'allaqa who is neither being divorced and neither being kept. Or any example that you want like that, Allah says that He is a wakil for everyone. If He desires, He can fix up your situation. Now, every single person has an individual test that they are given. One person's test is that they have a devoting, loving husband. That's their test. And one person has an abusive husband. That's their test. Both of them are a test. So the abusive husband says, oh, I wish I was given a loving, devoting husband. Okay? And the person who has a loving, devoting husband says that, I wish I was given something else. They don't see the ni'mah that they are being given. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is that true? Yes? You are smiling. So you know that it's true. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that He is a wakil for every single person. And He is enough as a wakil. And this is an evidence that no one needs an intermediary between himself and Allah. Allah is his wakil directly. You don't need a lawyer in between. You don't need to go to a sheikh and say, Sheikh, make dua for me. You don't need to go to the grave and say, oh sheikh, so and so, make dua on my behalf. Or you go to a peer and say, take me to Jannah with you. None of that is required because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Himself is directly a wakil. إِن يَشَأْ يُذْهِبْكُمْ. Here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This form of ayah comes in Surah Ibrahim. It comes in Surah Muhammad. And in one other place in the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so in Surah An'am, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that if He desires, إِن يَشَأْ, if He desires, then He can get rid of you. يُذْهِبْكُمْ, destroy you or get rid of you or replace you. One form of replacement is where you are destroyed completely. An entire people like Ad and Thamud and the people of Fir'aun are completely destroyed. That's one form. The second form is where some people of a nation are destroyed, like some of Quraysh were destroyed in Badr, in Uhud, in Khandaq, and many places like that. And others were kept. And all of Quraysh, is Quraysh here today? For all intents and purposes? Is Abu Jahl or his lineage around? No. They are gone and destroyed, right? But is the lineage of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam alive? Yes, in the millions, right? So this is one form. A third form is, and this is the form that you and I should be afraid of, is where you are being used by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to do some good thing. This good thing can be an activity of da'wah. It can be an activity of teaching. It can be an activity of charity, of good social work. Can be any kind of thing that you are involved with. And then what did you do? Either you were not consistent, or either the ni'mah that Allah gave you, you did not take it. What is the greatest ni'mah? The ni'mah of knowledge, the ni'mah of hidayah. Allah brought you closer to Him, and what did you do? You went away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You said it's too hard to read the Quran. It's too hard to concentrate on the prayer. It's too hard to wake up in Fajr. So what does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say? إِن يَشَأْ يُذْهِبْكُمْ. He gets rid of you for that amal. He doesn't need you. If you are not consistent with the work, He gets rid of you and gets someone else to do that role that you used to do. And then after that, you cry and that opportunity does not come back. This ayah is a severe ayah for those who actually understand it. For those who don't understand it, they don't really get the depths of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying. What He is saying is, I am using you. This ni'mah is the greatest ni'mah. Consider it a ni'mah that you should give shukr for. Don't consider that this amal is hard, so I'm going to leave it. No. Say that it came to me with a lot of trouble, so I need to work very hard to keep it. All of you are spending an hour sitting here. Is it easy or hard to come and sit here? It's hard, it's challenging, right? This is just an example. And one day you say, I'm just feeling lazy, I don't want to come. That's the point, the door that the shaitan walks in. And what happens is the next week, even though there's nothing happening and you are free, it becomes hard to come. That's called tawfiq. What was the tawfiq? Is that you are coming every week. That's the actual tawfiq. When you turn away and you become lazy, then Allah replaces you with someone else. Someone else comes to learn the knowledge. Always consider yourself dispensable. You can be thrown aside. Okay? If the person has kibr, any kind of arrogance, let him remember two things. He was created from dirty water. That when that comes out, you have to take a ghusl. That you take a tissue and throw it in the bin. That's what you were created from. And the second thing you should remember is that inside you is feces. Every single day, you have rubbish inside you. So if a person starts to think that I have become something, remember what he was made from, and remember what is inside him, and he will have no kibr. And then he will remember that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is perfection, and that we are in need of His guidance all the time. So Allah reminds you and says, إِن يَشَأْ يُذْهِبْكُمْ وَأَيُّهَا النَّاسُ, O people, وَيَأْتِي بِآخَرِينَ. Zamakhshari in Al-Kashaf says that the meaning here is that all of mankind can be destroyed. If Allah desires, He can replace us. Before insan was jinn, and the jinn had the khilafah on the earth. And Allah took the khilafah from them and gave it to the insan. And before the ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the khilafah was given to Bani Israel. Allah took it from Bani Israel and gave it to the ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So He is showing us history already, that it has already happened. It's not something that Allah cannot do, but He can do it. Imam al-Alusi disagrees with him and says that Here the meaning is not all of mankind, but a part of mankind. وَيَأْتِي بِآخَرِينَ. And he goes into the depth of the word آخَرِينَ. If someone is very interested in grammar, he can read that section. وَكَانَ اللَّهُ عَلَى ذَلِكَ قَدِيرًا. Verily Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is able to do so. مَنْ كَانَ يُرِيدُ ثَوَابَ الدُّنْيَا فَعِنْدَ اللَّهِ ثَوَابُ الدُّنْيَا وَالْآخِرَةِ وَكَانَ اللَّهُ سَمِيعًا بَصِيرًا. We did this type of ayah in Surah Al-Baqarah when we discussed the maqam of Hajj. فَمِنْهُمْ مَنْ يَقُولُ رَبَّنَا آتِنَا فِي الدُّنْيَا وَمَا لَهُ فِي الْآخِرَةِ مِنْ خَلَاقٍ. And from them who say, "Oh Allah, give us in the dunya," and he does not have anything in the akhirah. وَمِنْهُمْ مَنْ يَقُولُ رَبَّنَا آتِنَا فِي الدُّنْيا حَسَنَةً وَفِي الْآخِرَةِ حَسَنَةً. And then there are those who ask for the dunya and for the akhirah. Therefore, we are taught to ask for the dunya and the akhirah, not just the akhirah. Alright? That's one concept. Second concept is that if a person asks for the dunya alone, then Allah says there is nothing in the akhirah for him. In fact, He mentions in Surah that whoever asks for the dunya, we will give him the dunya and make it muzayyan for him so that he is attracted to it. And there is nothing in the akhirah for him. And a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ in an authentic narration, just a second, I forget the source, that he mentions that a person who asks for the akhirah, then we give him the akhirah and the dunya comes to him for the rizq that has been written. He will get it regardless. And the one who asks for the dunya alone, then we make him work harder in the dunya. Okay? He gets tired in the dunya and he works harder for it. And he becomes more fearful that the dunya will be lost. Two things. He gets stuck in the dunya and his vision of the dunya becomes one of fear. He's not happy. And the third is the rizq comes to him regardless. Okay? And he gets nothing in the akhirah. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, number one, teaching us taqwa, and then He gives us fear, right? He says, if you do kufr, I can get rid of you. And on the muqabil, He says that, مَنْ كَانَ يُرِيدُ ثَوَابَ الدُّنْيا, then let him remember. He gives a stick, a carrot and stick approach. Always you find this in the Quran. Sometimes the stick will come first, then the carrot, and sometimes the carrot will come first, and then the stick. He says that, فَعِنْدَ اللَّهِ ثَوَابُ الدُّنْيَا وَالْآخِرَةِ. This is very munasib, that after mentioning Lillahi ma fi samawati ma fil ard 3 times, He comes and finishes with what? Allah has the akhirah. So it's this kamalul wus'ah, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has kamal in extremity. He reminds us to go after the akhirah. وَكَانَ اللَّهُ سَمِيعًا بَصِيرًا. Verily Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is all hearing and all seeing. Why do you think He mentioned Sami'an Basira? Keep you guys awake.
To remind you that anything you do.
Very good. Sometimes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He is talking about amal, He says, وَكَانَ اللَّهُ بِمَا تَعْمَلُونَ خَبِيرًا. And sometimes He will say, Basira. Okay? Here He says, Sami'an Basira. Okay? It's to remind you that Allah is seeing and watching what you do, but in addition to that, Man kana yuridu, al-irada is where? Where does the irada happen? In the heart. Okay? And secondly, in the dua, in what you ask. So Allah says that He is hearing your du'as and then He is seeing your actions again. And there's a famous hadith, and you know this hadith, that in the very beginning of judgment, on the day of judgment, a man will be brought forth who died in battle in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah will ask him, why did you fight? He said that I fought in your cause. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, no, you fought so that people would say that you are brave, and he will be thrown into Jahannam. And a second person will be brought and he will be asked, why did you recite the Quran? And he will say, I did it for your sake. And Allah will say, no, so that people would say that you were a qari and so on and so forth, and he'll be thrown into Jahannam. And the third person will be brought and will be asked, why were you so generous? And he will say, it was for your sake. And I will say, no, it was so that people would say that you were generous. All three of these people will be thrown into Jahannam. The example is of those who have niyyah li ghayrillah, niyyah for day, dunya. All of the mufassirun in this ayah took the meaning of jihad. Why? Because this surah is a surah of jihad, right? Man kana yuridu thawab ad-dunya, whoever fights for the reason of ghanima, of the war booty, he will get the war booty, but will he get any reward in the akhirah? The answer is no. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu kunu qawwamina bil qisti shuhad. If you guys are tired, we can stop here or we can do one more ayah. One more ayah? Yes? يا أيها الذين كونوا قوامين بالقسط شهداء لله ولو على أنفسكم أو الوالدين والأقربين. O you who believe, كونوا قوام. الرجال قوامون على النساء. I already told you what al-qayyum means. So what does al-qawwam mean? Standing up firmly, repetitively, all the time. So this is not saying do justice once or twice. It is saying do justice every single occasion and all the time. Because if you do justice once or twice and you do injustice the rest of the time, you will not be called a just person. And a system will not run on people who are just occasionally. A system will only run when people are just on every single occasion. كونوا قوامين بالقسط, with justice. Qist is justice. Justice in your words and in your actions. شهداء لله. Here the شهداء لله has two different meanings. One is that when you are doing justice, you do it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So here shuhada'a means for the sake of Allah. And that your justice has no other purpose except the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The second is that this is a khabar. The first is that it is a hal, and the second is that this is a second khabar. Shuhada'a lillahi, meaning that you are the witnesses of Allah on earth. And here the fuqaha have taken the meaning that if 4 just people came, so a person who does fornication or zina, it requires how many witnesses? 4 witnesses for him to be given the had. So if a judge is sitting and 4 people come who meet the character certificate and they certify that this man has done zina, that the judge has to give the had. Okay? He has to take the witnesses. Why? Because Allah says, Shuhada'a lillah. If the judge, the case has been proven, there's no problem with the witnesses, there's no problem with the evidences. If he goes against the evidence when it is clear, then he actually goes against the Quran and he goes against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this system of witnesses is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has clearly said. Shuhada'a lillahi walau ala anfusikum. Now here it starts to get interesting. Allah says you have to be just even if it is against yourselves, against your parents, and against your relatives. You have to be just all the time. Why do you see? There's 2 aspects here. Number 1, when you are just all the time, then everyone benefits. You benefit, your parents benefit, your relatives benefit. Why? Because if injustice becomes rampant, just you take the example of corruption, right? If you go into the Muslim countries and you get stopped by the policeman, what happens? The policeman doesn't give you a fine. He wants his bribery, right? Now, if one policeman does that, your chance of running into one policeman who wants bribery is going to be extremely rare. Number one, to be stopped by the policeman doesn't happen every day, but to run into that one policeman who wants bribery out of 100,000 policemen is rare. But let's say 50% of policemen are corrupt, which is what is the common situation. Your chance of running into a policeman becomes an everyday occurrence. Do you understand the problem? So when this happens, then every person says that the system is corrupt. Let me do corruption as well. Let my brother do corruption. My uncle does corruption. Everyone starts to do corruption. Then you yourself can't afford anything. Every time you want to get something, you want to do a business, you have to pay him 30,000. I'll give you an example. My brother-in-law is doing a partial business, and he says the auditor comes to look at our school, and he says, if I audit your school properly, I'm going to find this, and I'm going to find this, and I'm going to find this. None of those things exist. But what does he say? I'll find this, and I'll find this, and your school will be shut down. Just give me 100,000. So what does he have to do now? To run his school, to run a business, he said, okay, have 100,000. And then he comes again in 3 months' time. He's not due for 5 years, but he comes again in 3 months. Why? Because he's only certified for 3 months. Do you understand? Now the whole system is running on corruption. Anyone who wants to do everything. Now the auditor himself, when he'll want to go do something, someone else will want money. So he thinks he made 100,000 from one business, but in fact, he's not made anything. Because everyone is running in loss. So when you yourself do injustice, remember that then the whole society will do injustice towards you as well. So when you do justice, even if you are harmed by that one action, overall you benefit. Do you understand this concept? أو الوالدين والأقربين. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَقَضَى رَبُّكَ أَلَّا تَعْبُدُوا إِلَّا إِيَّاهُ وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا. He says you have to do ihsan. So the person might think that ihsan to the walidain is that I don't say the truth against them. Allah says no. You say the truth even if they are the parents. That does not go against bir. Do you understand this concept? So saying a true word, if your parents are doing injustice and you say the truth to them or you stand up for the truth, that does not go against bir. It has to be done politely and humbly and with hikmah, but the person still has to speak the truth in its place. أو الوالدين أو الأقربين, and even if they are relatives. إن يكن غنيا أو فقيرا فالله أولى بهما. If the person is rich, a person may not want to say the truth because he benefits from the rich person. أو فقيرا, if he is poor, a person may not want to say the truth because he might have rahmah on the poor person. So Allah says no, you still stand for the justice even if they are rich or poor. فَاللَّهُ أَوْلَى بِهِمَا. Allah is more closer to the justice than either of these two parties. فَلَا تَتَّبِعُوا الْهَوَىٰ أَن تَعْدِلُوا. This is a complex statement. Don't follow your desires, أَن تَعْدِلُوا, which has 4 different meanings. I'll just give you 2 just for the sake of brevity. أن تَعْدِلُوا can come from udul and it can come from adl. And those two have opposite meanings. So one translation can be, do not follow your desires lest you may deviate from udul. Okay? The other is, do not follow your desires so that you may do justice. So here instead of an ta'dilu, li an ta'dilu. Okay? And there are 2 other meanings, but you'll get confused by those translations, so I'll just stick to those 2 meanings. So here, the meanings are completely opposite of each other. But the essence is that don't follow your own desires when you are doing justice. وَإِن تَلْوُوا أَوْ تُعْرِضُوا. Talwu is a word that means twisting of the tongue, twisting the words for your own benefits. Don't twist the words injustice, and don't do i'rad, don't stay away from speaking a true word. فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ كَانَ بِمَا تَعْمَلُونَ خَبِيرًا. Verily Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching what you do. We'll stop here inshallah, and we'll continue with ayah number 136 next week. Any questions?
وإنت العطف with which word comes before it?
Here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given a sequence of connected sentences. Okay? وَإِن تَلْوُ is related to قَوَامِينَ بِالْقِسْطِ. Okay? So do justice. Do justice, number one, شُهَدَاءَ لِلَّهِ. Number two, even if it against yourselves, your parents, your relatives. Number three, do justice even if the person is ghani or faqir. Number four, don't follow your desires. Number five, don't twist your words. Number six, don't stay away from doing justice.
Does the word qist come from Islam?
No, it's a separate word.
Does it come from the word qist?
Qist is his own words, qasata. Yeah, is the root word of qist.
So al-ta'aridu means if it's in one's power to do justice, then he can run away from it. He has to.
Yes, so if, for example, a person is called upon as a witness to something, then he is mandated to do that. Okay?
He knows that what happened.
Staying silent is a party to dhulm. Here, there is another concept to be discussed, which Al-Qurtubi mentions in detail. You can go and read it if you're interested. And it was very interesting reading, actually, if you are interested in law. I have, obviously, doing tafsir, I have an interest in law, because there's so much fiqh in the Quran. If you do tafsir, you get interested in everything. There's no way to hide from it. But he mentions, for example, that a husband cannot be a witness in favor of a wife. A wife cannot be a witness in favor of her husband. A brother cannot be a witness in favor of another brother. Why? Because he has a conflict of interest. And all the Mufassirun say, Ibn Shihab Zuhri stated that people used to be witnesses for each other. But then corruption grew to the extent that the fuqaha started to say that a person who has any kind of conflict of interest, do you understand conflict of interest? If he has any kind of ability to gain from being the witness, he cannot be a witness. In favor, right? Now, and if he is against, and it is proven that he has some kind of animosity, some kind of grudge, he cannot be a witness. Okay? Now, let's say there's a dispute between two neighbors. One neighbor says he built the fence on my land, not on the boundary. Okay, and he has usurped my land. They're going to be a witness against each other. Do you understand that? But let's say he brings along a friend who hates his neighbor from 30 years ago. He has a long grudge. He cannot be a witness. Fuqaha have said that if a person is this, but if it is proven that he is a righteous, upright person, then his witness can be taken. So cross-examination has to happen. The lawyers will cross-examine the witness to see if they are a proper witness or not.